It's a cozy Saturday night. Candles burn, rain pours, and you're watching Howl's Moving Castle with a glass of hot beverage in your hand. As Hayao Miyazaki introduces Sophie's fantastic journey, the protagonist of the movie through whose eyes the magical world will unfold itself, you start to notice something strange. The colorful and lively surroundings of the world are replaced by dark sceneries once war enters the picture. Alongside with the changing world, you closely follow Sophie's own self-discovery journey as her appearance changes, seemingly out of the blue. Once we see her an old lady, the next she's young again, only to be transformed back within seconds. So, what's up with this movie and what should you take away from it? A young hat maker named Sophie meets a wizard named Howl while traveling to see her sister Letty. The jealous witch of the waste later turns her into a 90-year-old woman. Sophie sets off on foot through the countryside in an effort to reverse the curse. She runs into Turnip Head, a living scarecrow. She then joins Howl's Moving Castle as a cleaning lady, where she meets Markl, a youthful apprentice of Howl, and Calcifer, a fire demon who is the catalyst for the castle's magic and mobility. In exchange for Sophie removing his connection with Howl, Calcifer agrees to lift Sophie's curse. In the meantime, Sophie's country is caught in conflict with a nearby kingdom that is looking for its missing prince. Howl is called to battle by the king, however he chooses to send Sophie to the king in disguise as his mother, to inform him that Howl is too cowardly to engage in battle. He gives Sophie an enchanted ring that will direct her to Calcifer and ensure her safety before she departs. Sophie encounters Suleiman, the chief witch of the king, as well as the witch of the waste, who Suleiman humiliates by draining her of all her strength and changing her appearance to that of a frail old woman. Suleiman reminds Sophie that if Howl does not comply, he would suffer the same fate. Then Howl shows up to save Sophie. He is transformed into a monster by Suleiman in an attempt to trap him, but with Sophie's assistance, he remembers who he is and just escapes death. Along with the former Witch of the Waste and Suleiman's dog Heen, the group manages to escape. While this is going on, soldiers from each kingdom rob Yenkin's and Pendragon's residences, Howl's aliases in those nations. However, given that the castle's enchantment allows for passage between its 4 distinct dwellings, the guys only discover an empty courtyard and a storehouse, respectively. Sophie discovers that Howl has been changing into bird-like creatures to thwart both sides in the conflict, but that each transition makes it harder for him to revert back to human form. She also learns that Howl's life is somehow connected to Calcifer's. The castle is then parked outside the town after Howl has it magically connected to Sophie's house. A few days later, Suleiman's troops attack the home and Sophie's hat shop, while enemy aircraft bomb the town. To keep the group safe, Howl sets out. The castle is finally brought to an end, as Sophie orders everyone out of the house and takes Calcifer out of the fireplace. After realizing that Calcifer has Howl's heart, the Witch of the Waste takes the fire demon and sets herself on fire. Calcifer is put out when Sophie panics and spills water on the witch. The remaining portion of the castle suddenly splits in half. Sophie is left behind after falling into a crater. Following the enchanted ring, Sophie finds herself in the past, where she witnesses a young Howl saving Calcifer. And as she is whisked away, Sophie screams for them to find her in the future. And after she arrives in the present, she meets Howl again, and together they rejoin the others. The witch gives Howl's heart back, and Sophie puts it inside him to bring him back to life and set Calcifer free, albeit he chooses to stay on his own volition. The spell on Sophie has been lifted, but her hair will remain silver. Turnip Head transforms back into a human after she kisses him on the cheek, showing himself to be Justin, the abducted prince from the rival realm. He admits that his curse can only be lifted by the kiss of his one true love. There is no secret by now that Miyazaki is an avid pacifist who's been extremely transparent in his movies about governmental war propaganda, and Howl's Moving Castle is definitely no exception. The movie is filled with visuals depicting the horrors of war, which are in sharp contrast with a harmonious natural world. When he received an Oscar for Spirited Away, he said that he had a great deal of rage about the Iraq War. So, he felt some hesitation about the award. On the eve of the Iraq War, Miyazaki decided to make a film that he felt would be poorly received in the United States. Despite the film's success in that country, literary scholar Dani Cavallaro stated that Miyazaki was able to create a film which ought in principle to have caused a certain unease among the American audiences. In the movie, Madame Suleiman appears to have only sadistic motivations for creating conflict, and despite being omniscient, is unable to recognize the idiocy of the war until the very end of the story. This reflects Miyazaki's desire to show real-world conflict as also being somewhat arbitrary and fueled by the desires of capricious people. The stunning character designs help us understand the story from a visual perspective. Let us start with Sophie's mysterious curse. At the beginning of the movie, she's a plain and simple young woman, feeling outshined by everyone around her. She is perfectly content with the place in her little hat shop, doing her daily chores at the cost of her own joy almost. But Sophie's physical appearance changes drastically once the Witch of the Waste turns her into a 90-year-old woman. Since then, she becomes happier and livelier than ever before. Her new body allows her to free herself from the boundaries of her insecurities, leaving home immediately, as most children often do once they are mature enough or financially stable. We see Sophie feeling like an outcast at home among her more conventionally attractive sister and mother, whom we see are surrounded by men's attention at all times. What makes Sophie's story so compelling is the relatability of her inner turmoil. As someone who's always been ignored and looked down on, I felt her melancholic and resigned look with increased intensity. The feeling of accepting your fate without hope of ever being able to improve one's situation. The Witch of the Waste's physical appearance could symbolize Sophie's hidden desire for beauty and love. Thus, the witch acts not only as an agent of fate, but also as a cautionary tale for Sophie. She tries to forcefully steal Howl's heart, curses and despises everyone whom she perceives as a threat to her status. Once her magic is lifted, we see the witch in her true form, an old, senile lady, the very image she tried to conflict upon Sophie. As an old lady, Sophie breaks free from the chains of self-doubt and insecurity, finally being able to move on to the next growth challenge. Her state of mind now finally matches her outer appearance, but sometimes, at key moments, Sophie lifts the spell and becomes a beautiful young woman again. When she passionately defends the young wizard, when she confesses her love to him in her dreams, when we see her sleep, others can see her in her juvenile form again, but the slightest doubt, the slightest fear brings her back to her old woman's body. By the end of the movie, she embraces her looks and becomes youthful and confident, someone who has grown emotionally to accept and love herself. Howl's physical appearance also matches his personality at different points of the movie. When we first meet Howl, he's a charming and mysterious young man, clothed with the finest garments. As the story progresses, however, Howl begins his own self-discovery journey, coming to terms with whom he is and his role in society. Once Sophie mixes his potions, we immediately spot the redness of his hair, matching the fiery fury of his angry fist. At this moment, we see him as he truly is, a brat who tries to avoid responsibilities and is too afraid to face the female authorities in his life up until this point. He's been constantly trying to avoid the Witch of the Waste and Madame Suliman. His unwillingness of standing up to the repercussions of his own actions are challenged only when Sophie enters his life and they embark on this journey of personal development together. If you are to compare this Howl with this, what do you see? What's different? What has changed in his appearance? His arc has taken Howl from a mirrored image of Sophie's sister and mother to a confident young man who doesn't need an extravagant display to impress by the end of the story. The transformations of both Howl and Sophie symbolize the impact of war on the human psyche. In Howl's case, the limitations of masculine strength and idealized heroic figures are put into question. We see him taking the form of a huge black bird capable of total destruction, making him a valuable soldier for Madame Suliman. But by transforming himself into the bird, Howl risks losing his own humanity like all the other soldiers we see in the course of the movie. As we often see in military symbolism, the bird is an omnipresent symbol representing both the fake ideals of freedom, as in the case of the eagle, as well as death that usually follows war, symbolized by the crows. The heroic side of Howl, transformed into a kamikaze-like flying fighter amidst a landscape reminiscent of fire-bombed Tokyo, is rendered real by the fact that Howl indeed has no goal. The gradual transformation of a gentle, charming man into a demon as he is dragged into battle may be construed as powerful protest against the meaningless of war, cloaked in the guise of a children's fairy tale. A lovable yet mysterious character of the story is the fire demon who resides in Howl's castle. This little troublemaker has a lot to unpack. His character is full of symbolism and death. The once falling star is turned into the heart of the story, quite literally. If the castle itself is alive and moving like a living being, from its chicken-like legs to the fluid movements of the piles of junk which form it, Calcifer is undoubtedly its heart, fueling it with its magic fire. As in any demonic contract, he is obliged to respect the wishes of his master and obey his orders, but due to his fiery and unpredictable nature, he will always find loopholes to keep secrets, like when his first instinct, when he met Sophie, was to form a contract to free himself from the bonds with Howl. Calcifer also symbolizes the embodiment of Howl's subconscious. It appears that whatever his master is going through, Calcifer knows and can feel Howl's distress. After one time, when Howl comes back exhausted from the battle, Calcifer tells him that he will soon not be able to return to human form if he continues fighting, sensing Howl's inner struggles. Remember when Sophie has a pain in her heart and says to Calcifer that he won't understand because he hasn't gotten one? His reply was, "Yes, I do," as in fact, he is Howl's heart. Calcifer also says to Sophie, "I'm scared too. I will suffer if Howl does." What a perfect line of dialogue to show us their bond. An interesting note I found on Ghibli Wiki belongs to Buddha Connections, and it is about the symbolism of the shooting star. They write, "We understand that the Witch of the Waste has always known Howl's curse too, hence her message and her interest in Calcifer. This symbolism of the star is one of the recurring themes of the story's universe. The three wise men and the polar star, the myth of the castor and Pollux turning into a star, the little prince." But in Howl's Moving Castle, Miyazaki once again reverses the symbolism. Where usually the star evoked hope, the fulfillment of a wish, the miracle. The star here becomes a curse, a powerful spell which pursues Howl throughout the work, and which will mark Sophie forever. Markl goes through changes as much as Sophie and Howl do. He starts as a kid who hides his true self in fear of not being taken seriously, and ends up a confident apprentice who's not afraid to show his true age, embracing not only his age but also his identity. I personally empathize a lot with him as he strives to meet society's expectations on what a wizard should look like, behave, and ultimately embody. Honestly now, when you think of a wizard, do you imagine this? Or this? The common perceptions of certain professions, and implicitly the emotional burden that comes with those high expectations, embodied beautifully by Markl in the course of the movie, have a high degree of relatability. How many times have you found yourself pursuing a new passion, starting university, or perhaps getting a new job in a completely different field, only to be looked down on, marked as a misfit, or experiencing the nerve-wracking effects of the imposter syndrome? Markl desperately tries to excel at his job, taking care of house affairs and being the manager of his household and businesses, meanwhile forgetting to live. His workaholism bites him the moment Sophie enters the picture and prepares breakfast, to which Markl replies, "I can't remember the last time we had a real breakfast." Throughout the movie, he learns from old Sophie what it's like to relax, enjoy the moment, and treat your tasks with detachment. Ultimately, he accepts himself, thus having no need of disguises anymore by the end of the movie. Howl's Moving Castle is a masterwork that conveys two main coming-of-age stories. Change, in this movie, brings the promise of a new hope, and that of a brighter future for our protagonists. Sophie changes from a young and insecure hatmaker to a more mature version of herself, who comes to terms with who she is. Howl changes from a conflicted and emotionally immature boy torn between accomplishing his duties and finding the courage to stand up for himself into a courageous and lovable young man. Miyazaki's works are extremely compelling and beautiful. Even the war scenes are mesmerizing to watch, drawing you deeper into this fantastical world's reality, making you feel repulsed by the absurdity of violence which destroys the natural harmonic composition of the landscapes. And, at the same time, he delivers his pacifist messages quite clearly. I believe at this point that no one can deny that we live in turbulent times that are insanely absurd, much like Sophie and Howl's. When we are bombarded with apocalyptic media news of economic downfalls, loss of countless lives in wars around the globe, the incoming climate catastrophe, and the elite's unwillingness to take action, let us focus on the present moment and on the things that are in our own control. From Howl's Moving Castle, we can learn the power of endurance, courage, and resilience in face of adversity. Even in the bleakest and most absurd social-political situations, I believe we can dare to hope for a better future. If you enjoyed this video so far, don't forget to like and subscribe to see similar content in the future. Thank you so much for staying with me till the end, as this is my first ever video on YouTube. It means a lot. You're the best.